Hi, welcome to the channel. Today's video is titled Three British Battleships Ambush Italian Fleets, Battle of Cape Matapan. Interesting. We are going to check this video together, and I'll love your thoughts and your contribution in the comments below. Let's dive right in.
On the night of March 28, 1941, a force of Italian cruisers was ambushed at point-blank range by a group of British battleships. In just 4 devastating minutes, the Italian squadron was almost totally destroyed, as a day of cat-and-mouse fleet manoeuvring came to an explosive end. As the sun rose on the morning of March 28th, it found the British battle fleet at sea, steaming hard to the northwest. On the bridge of the flagship HMS Warspite was Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. It was a day that promised much for Cunningham. He knew that somewhere to his north was the Italian fleet, and he intended to bring it to battle. Under Cunningham's direct command was Warspite and her sister ships Valiant and Barham, each with 8 powerful 15-inch guns. Joining them was the aircraft carrier Formidable, loaded with torpedo-carrying albacore and swordfish biplanes, and 9 destroyers. Somewhere to the north was a supporting force of light cruisers and destroyers under Vice Admiral Henry Pridham Whipple, which had been diverted from its role escorting convoys to Greece to help hunt down the Italians. This was just as well, as the Italians had at sea 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 13 destroyers, and the brand new 40,000-ton battleship Vittorio Veneto, which had guns of the same size as the British battleships but could travel at 30 knots. This gave the Italians a big speed advantage and meant getting close to them would be difficult. And Cunningham, sceptical of long-range gunnery engagements, really did intend to get close. According to the fleet's gunnery officer, Commander Geoffrey Barnard, Cunningham had once argued the right range for any ship of the Mediterranean fleet, from a battleship to a submarine, to engage an enemy ship with gunfire is point blank, at which range even a gunnery officer cannot miss. The British did have one key advantage though, which is that they possessed an aircraft carrier. At 7:20 am, a spotter from Formidable spotted a group of unknown ships close to the location of the British cruiser force. For a while, the British admirals believed that Formidable was reporting their own ships, but as the light improved, this idea was dispelled when Pridham Whipple sighted Italian cruisers at 7:55 am. This was Force X under Rear Admiral Luigi Sansonetti. The British cruisers were outranged and soon under fire, so Pridham Whipple turned to the southeast, hoping to draw the enemy towards Cunningham's approaching battle fleet. Sansonetti followed, but then at 8:55 turned sharply back to the north, breaking off the engagement. Keen to stay in touch with the enemy, the British followed, unaware that they were now being drawn into a trap. Lurking just over the horizon was the Vittorio Veneto under Vice Admiral Angelo Icino, and a second group of cruisers led by Rear Admiral Carlo Cattaneo. With every minute, the British cruisers drew closer, until finally, just before 11 am, Icino turned south, spotting and opening fire on the British cruisers in quick time. As 15-inch shells crashed around his ships, Pridham Whipple immediately grasped the extreme danger he was in and signalled for smoke to be made and his squadron to turn away at the fastest speed each ship could maintain.
Again, when it comes to history, I just think that lots of things that actually happened in history. In fact, we are the greatest or luckiest, rather, we are the luckiest generation to be alive. Because imagine living in a time where you're not certain if there's ever going to be peace, war here and there, one way or the other, and stuff. Because come to think of it, like lots of the time when you check history, you see that lots they were, if they were not ending war, they were going on fighting war with another country, another nation, whatever, whether to be to defend or be to whatever you likes you want to add it. And it's taking away time, resources, Lives affected as well, people affected as well, businesses, what you name it.
Away to the east, Admiral Cunningham read the signals Pridham Whipple was
See
sending to
here,
his
see
ships with a
here.
mixture of anxiety and excitement. The kind of action Force B had just taken could mean only one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Italian battle fleet had been spotted. Cunningham pressed his fleet west at all possible speed and reached for the only way he could influence events before he arrived, the aircraft carrier Formidable. Formidable had already flown off a striking force in case it was needed, and just before 11:30, a force of 6 Fairey Albacores led by Lieutenant Commander Gerald Saunt moved in to attack Vittorio Veneto. All of their torpedoes missed, but it had the effect of forcing Ichino to break off the pursuit. Both sides now lost contact with each other, as the British cruisers steamed for the protection of the battleship's guns. Admiral Cunningham was now faced with the task of trying to bring to battle an Italian fleet that he did not know the location of and that was faster than him. The information Admiral Ichino had on his opponents was even sketchier. It was believed that HMS Formidable plus 1 escorting battleship had left port and was the source of the aircraft that had attacked his fleet, but not much else was known. Ichino guessed that Formidable had only recently left port and was probably at least 170 miles away. Even so, the threat of air attack was enough to head for home, knowing a single lucky hit could leave the Vittorio Veneto a sitting duck. Hoping to locate and slow the Italians down, Cunningham ordered a second torpedo attack, which flew off Formidable at 12:20 p.m. Led by Lieutenant Commander John Dalyell Stead, the group of 3 Albacore and 2 Swordfish aircraft flew for 2.5 hours before sighting Ichino's force shortly before 3 p.m. Together they moved in, with Dalyell Stead managing to score a hit on the Italian battleship with the final act before his aircraft was shot down. The torpedo slammed into the side of Vittorio Veneto, causing thousands of tons of flooding and temporarily stopping its engines. This was the chance to catch the Italians Cunningham had been waiting for. After the remaining planes returned to Formidable, Cunningham ordered a third strike prepared and detached Force B's cruisers to gain visual contact with the Italians as quickly as possible. At 5:35, Formidable's final attack wave of the day took off. 6 Albacores and 2 Swordfish determined to inflict another blow on the Italians before nightfall. By this stage, fearful of further air attack on his damaged flagship, Admiral Ichino was consolidating his fleet to provide a better anti-air protection. These 6 heavy cruisers formed a ring of steel around Vittorio Veneto. At 7:30, the third and final British air attack of the day began, 8 torpedo bombers streaking in from the east, with Ichino's fleet silhouetted against the fading western sky. A tremendous barrage of anti-air fire greeted them that was so fierce it forced many to break off. But the final aircraft to attack, at 7:46 p.m, released its torpedo and hit the heavy cruiser Polar square amidships. Polar quickly lost its engines and all electrical power, pulling out of line and coming to a halt. As this was happening, on Warspite Cunningham was grappling with a pivotal decision. At 7:18 p.m, Pridham Whipple had reported visual contact with the Italians 10 miles to his north, just before the light had failed. With his battleship still some distance away and no chance for any further air attacks, Cunningham had one card left to play. Push a number of fast destroyers forwards to try and attack the Italians at night, sinking or slowing them down enough to let the battleships catch up. He proposed to send 8 of the ships then accompanying the battle fleet forwards. It was inherently risky. Only 4 destroyers would remain to screen an equal number of capital ships, a completely inadequate number if they happened to run into a stray submarine. Cunningham's staff were not hugely keen on the idea. The Admiral himself wrote after the war, "Some of my staff argued that it would be unwise to charge blindly after the retreating enemy, to run the risk of ships being crippled and to find ourselves within easy range of the enemy dive bombers at daylight. I paid respectful attention to this opinion, and as the discussion happened to coincide with my time for dinner, I told them I would have my evening meal and would see how I felt afterwards."
I was about to say this thing. I hope they are not going blindly. Mm.
It's worth noting that Commander Barnard describes this conversation rather differently.
Oh,
Neither the Staff Officer Operations nor the Master of the Fleet liked the idea very much. ABC took one look at his supposed helpers and said, "You're a pack of yellow-livered skunks. I'll go and have my supper now and see after supper if my morale isn't higher than yours." Respectful attention, indeed. At 8:40 p.m, Force B detected a stopped ship 4 miles to its west and relayed its position to Cunningham before pressing on to try and catch the rest of the Italian fleet. Cunningham did not waste much time. At 9 p.m, he ordered his destroyers forward, under the command of Captain Philip Mack. Meanwhile, to the north, Admiral Icino had sent Rear Admiral Cattanio's division back south to find and help the stricken Polar. Icino believed that now that it was dark, his ships were safe from air attack and did not think the British battleships were as close as they were. It was to be a fatal miscalculation. At 10 past 10, HMS Valiant, the only one of Cunningham's battleships to be fitted with radar, was close enough to report the stopped ship 9 miles away. Cunningham, in defiance of conventional practice for handling battleships at night, turned his fleet together towards the unknown. The ships pressed south, looking for a glimpse of the stricken Italian cruiser. Suddenly, at 10:23, HMAS Stuart urgently reported new contacts looming out of the darkness just 2 miles away. Cattaneo had arrived, the destroyer Alfieri leading the cruisers Zara and Fiume, with 3 more destroyers following behind. The Italians were totally oblivious to the presence of the British, since none of their ships were fitted with radar. On sighting the new ships, Cunningham swung the fleet around as if it were a group of destroyers, slotting back into a single line and training their guns on the new contacts. At 10:27, the destroyer Greyhound snapped open its searchlights, illuminating the Fiume and silhouetting the Zara and Alfieri. An instant later, Warspite and Valiant opened fire together, the lead ship from less than 2,000 yards, point-blank range. 15-inch shells smashed into the Fiume, setting her ablaze and blowing her rear 8-inch turret clean over the side of the ship. Formidable, realising after a moment that it was in fact an aircraft carrier and close-range gun duels were not its strength, swung out of the British line. Barham pushed up to take its place, scoring hits on Alfieri and joining Warspite and Valiant in pummeling Cattaneo's flagship Zara. The Italians couldn't offer any fire in return, so quickly were they overwhelmed. At 10:31, the British ships turned away to avoid any risk from torpedoes, and the destroyers were detached to finish off the crippled Italian cruisers. The onslaught had lasted for just 4 minutes. A confused melee with guns and torpedoes between the British and Italian destroyers followed as the remnants of Cattaneo's squadron tried to escape.
4 minutes is like, I don't know how I want to calculate that, but 4 minutes is the fastest time. In fact, during war, every minute counts and all that. So that
Devastated by fires, the destroyer Alfieri and cruiser Fiume both sank at 11:15 and were followed by the destroyer Carducci 15 minutes later, sunk by gunfire from HMS Havoc. The other 2 Italian cruisers remained stubbornly afloat until Captain Mack's destroyers arrived at 2 a.m, fresh from a failed pursuit of Icino's battle fleet. After picking survivors up from both ships, Zara was sunk at 2:40 a.m. and Polar at 4:03 by torpedoes from HMS Jervis. This brought the Battle of Cape Matapan to an end. In a main engagement that had lasted scarcely 4 minutes, the Italian Navy had seen an entire heavy cruiser division wiped out along with 2 destroyers and more than 2,400 sailors, including Vice Admiral Cattaneo. The sum total of British losses was 3 aircrew and a single Albacore torpedo bomber. It was a crushing defeat for the Italians that destroyed their confidence in future fleet operations and ensured that control of the Eastern Mediterranean remains in British hands for the time being. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again
for sharing this, because I mean, obviously, when it comes to um history, there are lots of things that potentially happened, right? And sometimes there are even some battles that we potentially do not know or don't have knowledge of, or may that we don't know or we may not hear, except maybe we come across some relevant information and stuff. But again, this is just to tell you, never to underestimate Britain. right? Never underestimate them, obviously. And this is why, regardless, when you check history, you see that the British Empire was, I don't know, was like Great Britain, right? But still, um, history itself is quite rich and very telling. And Britain, I don't know. I think they had their very best back in the day, and I wish now they still would. But back then, they had their very best, and they were trying, right? But again, never underestimate person. You never know what's coming, right? And most of the time, when you check history, they keep proving and telling you time and time again, time and time again. 4 minutes in war, it's like 4 seconds, yeah, and it's so quick. It's so quick. But again, it's interesting because when you check, especially with war and stuff, I'm gonna say it again that we are the luckiest generation ever to be alive, because lots of the things that most likely happened in history, when you dig up history or learn history, you understand that we, thank God, we're not experiencing any of that, or we don't want to experience that. That's why for me, I say learn history for good. And um obviously, rather than learning history to change history, learn history so it's not repeated in the future, or it's not repeated. But obviously, we, time and time again, we get people who want history to be repeated and go back to say, oh, they want to counter this part of history. Hello, it's already happened. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Do you know about this war? Are you Italian? Are you British? What are your thoughts regarding this? Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, see you in the next